Good evening. Sorry for being a few minutes late. I got a new car and it's much faster, but I don't get here on time any better. So, So maybe think for a minute why you came here tonight, and also for the people listening online. It's very important to, actually motivation is a very important aspect to what we do. It's really, we think of motivation or intention as more important actually than even the action, because sometimes the action, the result of the actions we don't have control over, but we do have control over our intentions. So at our level, we can't really see so clearly guarantee the results of our actions, but we can have control over our intention. So these classes that I've been doing for quite a while now are designed to help integrate, really what is considered, what I consider, a complete psychology from the Buddhist point of view. And people who don't know, I don't know where people, what they know, what they don't know here. But clearly, we do say that clearly 2/3 of all of what Buddha taught, the historical Buddha 2,500 years ago, are teachings in psychology. So that's very unusual. I don't think there's a, if you want to call it a religion, like that. So sometimes people don't like calling Buddhism a religion. People make religions, they make institutions out of systems of thought, but it's a little bit, So there's a lot of science in Buddhist thought, there's a lot of psychology, there's a lot of philosophy. And in terms of religion, whatever that means, people make a religion because of what they need in terms of institutionalizing. And so, I don't know, we could say maybe science is becoming a religion. I guess science is kind of a religion, isn't it? It's faith-oriented, right?
It's a methodology. Science.
It's what?
It's a methodology.
It's a methodology. What's the definition of religion?
There's a definition of religion. It's a system of thought that describes reality.
System of thought describes reality. Then there's, so not all religions, it doesn't have to be faith-based to be called a religion.
Not necessarily.
Yeah. So most religions are faith-based, aren't they? Or have some element of faith-based. So just for a moment to set your intention as to what it is you, rather than we just walk in here, just like me. So we do have an intention. Intention is with us 24 hours a day, actually, in terms of when we study Buddhist psychology. It's one of the 5 omnipresent, we call mental factors, one of them being intention. So even when we're asleep, when we're in a coma, when we're dying, intention's there. Okay? So intention brought us here. Intention is active right now. So if you just think for a moment, like for myself, I would think that, my intention would be to be able to explain my thinking as clearly as I can so that it's of benefit to every being, including myself. Every being. Benefit, when we talk about benefit, that has many levels. The ultimate level we call is enlightenment, so it benefits the enlightenment. But enlightenment is really a word that describes a final state of happiness and well-being. We can get into the technical parts of it, but really, there's no other reason to talk about enlightenment. What is the purpose of life is nothing more than to be happy. Right? Maybe not? I say these things, you don't have to accept them. If the purpose of life is to be happy, then we talk about what's happiness. We're not going to go into all that now, that's not this class, but we think, what is happiness? We have to, and most people are just sort of stumbling along with that idea. In other words, they don't think I'm going to work today to be happy, but actually we go to work, we get in relationships, we create families, we create careers, we will get new cars. Really what's driving behind all of that, we go to eat, new restaurant, all is driving is this pursuit of happiness. Okay? Now happiness for most people, when you don't think about it, is really synonymous with pleasure. And that's sort of the trap. Okay, that's the trap. We don't know that pleasure itself is actually not happiness. Okay? Pleasure, something that feels good doesn't mean it's happiness. Okay? So we have to know what our definition of happiness is, and most of us don't have one. We have to actually, that's why we look at philosophies. It's interesting. We're just human beings. We get born. We spend our lives trying to be happy, but I don't think most of us know what that is. And even people will say, oh yeah, I know money doesn't buy you happiness. So then what is happiness? If someone says that to you and they say, okay, I believe you, then what is happiness? If money doesn't buy happiness, what does? Most people don't think about it, do they? In schools? Maybe they're starting to. So one of the things that's common in our culture about getting in the way of happiness is this idea of low self-esteem, low self-worth. These are common terms or ideas in terms of modern psychology, aren't they? Very common in terms of working with a therapist or psychologist. Low self-esteem, low self-worth, self-judgment, self-criticism are big, pretty common topics. As I said last time, though, it's very strange because when His Holiness Dalai Lama first came into contact with this idea, which was through his work he's worked for years with different disciplines of science. Many of his dialogues have been with psychologists, neuroscientists, many kinds of scientists, but in particular psychologists and neuroscientists. And they, at one point, many years ago, I think it was in the 80s, they spoke about low self-esteem and wanted to know what the Buddhist point of view was. And His Holiness says, well, what do you mean? So he began to explain it, and he showed kind of like they did understand what we're talking about. And I've heard this from other lamas as well. So they had to explain what low self-esteem, which, if we look at, and that's I'm not going to go through, these are all slides from last time, so I'm not going to, low. So, indicators of low self-esteem anyway. Heavy self-criticism and dissatisfaction, hypersensitivity to criticism with resentment against critics and feelings of being attacked, chronic indecision and exaggerated fear of mistakes, excessive will to please and unwillingness to displease any petitioner. This is out of, I don't know where I got this, probably from Wikipedia. I don't know. Perfectionism, which can lead to frustration when perfection is not achieved, neurotic guilt, pessimism, sees temporary setbacks as permanent intolerable conditions. So there's a lot of things I think we can identify, that's what low self-esteem is like. So that's something that His Holiness didn't really resonate much with. Okay, so that told me, when I heard that maybe this idea of low self-esteem is very culturally oriented. Maybe it's even generationally oriented. I don't know if it'd be interesting to know 100 years ago, was this part of the American, I say American, we don't know, America's not really easy to define, but just for our conversation, was it part of American conversation 100 years ago?
People were happier 100 years ago.
Was it happier? At least more set.
They had happier opinions.
Yeah.
But their situation was far more dire.
Far more dire.
It's very strange.
So was the Tibetans.
Yeah. So
was the Tibetans. I lived with Tibetans for many, many, many years, and of course they have, they have problems. It's not like they're a utopian culture, and I think other cultures are similar where they don't have this sort of extra layer. Somehow they don't have this layer of self-criticism, self-judgment. Doesn't mean they don't. Of course, they have guilt and those kind. But the other one, actually, it's an interesting point, because the other one they try to explain to His Holiness about this. They're talking about guilt, and there's no word in Tibetan for guilt. They have regret. And regret is actually, it can be actually a positive mental factor. We talk about it as a mental factor. Regret is a mental factor. It's one of the mental factors that's considered variable because it can be good or it could be bad, meaning helpful or harmful. Okay, won't go into that now, but so we did that before, right? We had a class on shame. I think we did a class on shame, right? And we talked about guilt and regret and the differences. But, there's healthy regret, which means you do something wrong and you regret doing it and you hope not to do it in the future, and that's healthy. That's about learning because we're going to make mistakes. So, but this other thing about guilt, this other thing about self-doubt is, what's the difference, do you think? What's the difference? When we're talking about low self-esteem or self-doubt, what's the difference between that and what happens with, let's say, generalizing in Tibetan culture? We're only generalizing, of course, or these other cultures where they don't have this sort of sense of low self-esteem and guilt. So it's important to look at what do they do instead. Okay, why do we have so much of it? At least we have it in our narrative. Depends whether there's a lot of it or not, but it's talked about.
I think the reason, more likely a material society.
So in a material society, you think there's more self?
Yeah, we have many, pre-programs that what consider successful, what consider good, and so when people don't have it in the material aspect of the definition, they feel like they are falling behind, not good enough. In which I think in my country, I think we more value family connection. How
right.
So all those, so we don't have.
Right. So Kim's saying that it has to do. I think that's right. I think if we don't know it, but we have these cultural. When I say don't know, we're sort of blind, or we stumble along in terms of cultural values, and then these are just passed on to our kids through television. Not necessarily in the family. Right? In the family unit, we have some effect on having different values. Yeah.
I think that it's interesting to note that over time, people in America have become less satisfied with the increase in communicative technology.
Less satisfied. I'm just going to repeat less satisfied in communicative technology.
With the increase of communicative technology.
With the increase of it.
It has minimized our genuine connections, and we are actually more isolated.
Becoming more isolated,
We feel it's the sense of not being more isolated because of the increase of social media and all of those things isn't accurate and genuine. So we don't even know what we're missing to look for it. So we go out and become more and more disillusioned, more and more depressed, because I think part of that is we're missing the genuine connection and the feeling of solidarity with the tribe.
So there's more isolation, less connection with our tribe, as you said.
We have more responsibility to be independent, go out on our own, not being supported, not feeling safe.
Right. It's interesting that technology's had that effect, though, isn't it? We also know that technology, for some people, has created more connection. Very small, effect of it. For some reason, it tends to have the connection, the effect that you're talking about, of more isolation and less connection. But yeah.
Well, more shallow connections. In many instances. This isn't a generalization across the
Yeah, it's really funny, isn't it? Facebook calls you friends. I friended him. It's like, it's not a friend. Maybe a contact, but not a friend. It's funny, isn't it? So this narrative is changing quite a bit. This was last time. I'm going to go quickly so we can get to the present time. Low self-esteem is the pain of inadequacy. The pain of inadequacy. Okay, do you remember? So one involves, you always have to improve because you're inadequate. You avoid risking failure, playing it safe. Withdraw from our present experience. Keep busy. Focus on other people's faults. I know. Okay. I'm not going to talk. So in Buddhist thought, we do talk about pride as being a negative or an afflictive mind. That's interesting, right? Why? So in Buddhist psychology and the Buddhist, when we talk about the afflictions, there are many words: afflictions, delusions, disturbing emotions. I think disturbing emotion, it's not actually accurate, but the word disturbing is good. Because we wouldn't think of, we don't think of like being really thirsty or really wanting to go get some dinner as a disturbing, as an emotion. It's not an emotion, it's a drive, right? It's a need. But so in Buddhist psychology, that's why I don't like the word disturbing emotions. It's disturbing mental factors. And there's many. And of course, attachment or desire or greed is one of them. So it's better to think, if you want to know what an affliction is, an afflicted mind or an afflicted emotion, it's something that disturbs the balance of the mind. Okay? And for us, I don't know if it's just for us, but maybe for me, one of the harder ones to see, when I first went to my first meditation course in Nepal, I thought, okay, I get this anger thing, but attachment, I don't see how that's a big deal. You don't see how that's disturbing. Because, attachment to my more comfortable bed or something like that, or, being with people, I didn't see it as so disturbing. So once the mind becomes more subdued, really, which is what the goal is, then attachment it feels really disturbing. Because the mind moves, it's always like moving. I want that thing. I'm attracted to that thing, right? And then it becomes really annoying because you can't sort of stop it. We're so habituated to being attracted. So, and in anger didn't seem like a big deal either. I didn't see it, But you think about it. Anger, I think anger is maybe not the greatest word for what that emotion, that affliction is describing. Anger, I think, is more like irritation, right? Attachment's irritation too. But it's kind of like, if you are like me and you watch, like when you drive, and I got this one red light up there at, what's this, Campbell? Is that Campbell? No. What's the other one? I came up from, what was I on? 280. Anyway, so there's one red light, and it was 4 minutes long. So that's, in Buddhist psychology, that mind that is, active at that time, when all the other cars got through and I got the red light. What is that mind? That's what they're calling as anger. Okay, we don't call it anger. It's irritation. So the mind is, it could be anger too, right? You swear and, whatever. It can, but more irritation when someone brings you, when you order, what do people like to eat? I'm a bit shy about that. You order your salad with balsamic vinegar dressing and it comes with ranch. That's irritation. You may be very polite, but underneath you're kind of like, something's going on. If it's not, that's what we're looking for. When Lama Zopa Rinpoche gets anything in front of him, his mind doesn't move. My belief. Dalai Lama, his mind doesn't move. It moves probably to more and more happiness, maybe. But it's not conceptual, by the way. And we're not talking about a conceptual experience for them. Okay. So that is what we're talking about in terms of irritation. Now, in Buddhist psychology, in Buddhist practice, we do, the goal is to be happy. So it's not like being self-punishing, right? So it's being happy in any situation. Remember who was here last time? Maybe no one was here. You were here, yeah. Do you remember my story about the washing the dishes? Yeah. Tenzing's dishes. Let me see if I... There. How Tenzing washes dishes. Do you mind if I tell it again real quick? So, many years ago, the incarnation of one of my main teachers, Zong Rinpoche, he was just 11 years old, a monk. He's very renowned for his status. He's very high in the hierarchy. Came to live with us for about 8 or 9 months because he wanted to go to a modern school. He had told his attendant in his previous life, when I take rebirth, right? It'd be nice to have that kind of authority. Then please I would like to make sure that I attend a secular school in the West. That's amazing. So here he was. And his attendant's name was Tenzing Wangchuk. And they were staying with us. And I used to, at that time I think I was an intern. I was working up in Palo Alto. And driving up and back. It's about an hour from Santa Cruz. So I used to come back about 8:30 at night. And then I'd, usually my job was wash the dishes, right? My wife would be very kind to cook. And then I would, do the dishes thing. So Tibetans are, again, I'm generalizing, but they're very serving people. They're very, very, they don't really sit still, and let you wait on them. So I was coming home and then eating dinner, and then maybe Tenzin would be up before I would be up, from the table, washing the dishes. So I'd be there trying to help him, and he's like very competent in his dishes washing. So slowly I would gravitate to the couch, start watching the news maybe or something like that. Yeah, because he just wouldn't, I was taking advantage in one way, and the other way he was just happy to do it. But then he was really noisy at doing it. The dishes clanging, the kind of dishwasher people. And you've got to remember, in those days, they used to wash their dishes like under a tap, outside or something. They didn't have any. So then all of a sudden, I don't know if it was my view. I was getting like a little irritated because it was so noisy. I couldn't hear the TV, and why was he doing? And then I thought, God, I think the plates are. I think there's a few more chips on the plates, and the bowls are getting a little. Those little, yeah. So then I'm thinking, day after, it's going on for a few days, and what do? Do you say something? But then you say something, he's doing this nice little, generous service for you. And then, but I was getting irritated. So after about a week of this, I finally got the courage. I don't know. I mean, I do stupid things all the time. So I said, Tenzing, maybe could you wash the dishes a little quieter? Because I think maybe we're getting these. I showed him a chip or two, And he looked at me. What would you do, by the way? If I said that to you, what would you do?
Okay.
Okay?
I'd tell you to wash myself.
Uh-huh. Because you would be irritated with me, right?
I would comply but feel bad.
You would comply and feel bad.
Oh, yes.
But you wouldn't say anything to me?
Oh, no.
Oh. You'd be saying like something about you.
I would be,
Yeah, something wrong.
Yeah, something wrong.
Right. Yeah. There's many different reactions depending on person's personality, right? So he looked at me and said, okay. I went back to washing the dishes. I mean, that's the right answer because he doesn't have, I don't know if he doesn't have, but at least in that context, I don't think he has much low self-esteem from the point of view that we have it, that people have it, okay? So that's how Tenzin washes dishes. That's how he goes through life. Okay, let's talk about that. That was Don Lama's surprise. This is where I finished last time. Why this slide is up there is just to re-emphasize that this is one of my favorite kind of metaphors for understanding how things work inside of us. And the recent science, of course, is very exciting in terms of neuroscience and that sort of thing. So the way this works is that when we have experiences, and then the sensitivity is multiplied as we're younger, because our neural pathways are not as developed. You're not a blank slate, but we're more of a soft slate, okay? So you can think about how you were as a child. By the way, neural pathways continue forming until we die. But they get more formulated. I mean, you get ruts. So if you have an experience as a child, we have an experience as a child, and let's say your mother rages. Anyone's mother used to do that? Yeah. So when you were with your mother, you began to create meaning about what she was doing. And, depending on the age, you would create some kinds of different meanings. A lot of times around that, it's very hard to not think that there was you did something wrong, right? So, and it's probably intimidating to be around that, so you didn't know, because the power was such an imbalance for a young child. That how do you handle that energy, right? So all that time, you're thinking. One is you're thinking, you're feeling, and then the third one is you're creating meaning, or we're creating. I don't mean to say you. We are creating meaning. One is creating meaning. Now, James and I may have created different meaning around our mother's raging or father, right? Generally speaking, there's certain themes, of course, for young children who don't have the whole repertoire of making sense of things, and it's all very personally, focused because they're developing their personality, their sense of identity. It's probably going to be something about I did something wrong, or there's something wrong with me. And then how many times, so depending on what it is, then continually there's that narrative going on, right? Narratives fire neurons are what narratives are. That's the physical chemical reaction that's going on in the brain. So as those neurons keep firing in a similar fashion, they were creating the neural pathways. Now the neural pathways about that Urs received because his mother didn't rage and complimented him and praised him and cuddled him and gave him affection, right? He didn't have any of that energy. So those neural pathways that James and I created are sort of dormant in him. And other neural pathways are formed. Okay? Which gives him a lot more ammunition later in life when his wife rages at him. Right? Because he has a different... Now, when my wife gets angry at me, I would go into what's familiar, right? Because those ruts are deeper. And then I begin making meaning, like what? What's wrong with me? So that's the Reader's Digest version of neuroscience and low self-esteem. Because during the time of young, in particular, forming the identity, if the identity is about I need to be a certain way, and if I'm not that way, then something's wrong, what do you bring into your later in your life? Okay? So we can really help our kids, of course. Now, is the opposite of that to praise them? Compliment them? Right? No matter what? No. That has its own problems. Okay? Remember the self-esteem movement? There was anyone remember that? It was right when I moved. No, I was still living in Nepal then. Do you remember? Yeah. What was it? A self-esteem bill, in California bill to develop a self-esteem coalition or something and bring it. It only lasted 2 years, I think, is what I remember. A couple
It's back.
It's back? Oh, maybe it's done the right way this time. I don't know. Is it really?
There's 35 characteristics that if children learn it before they're like 10, they seem to be more successful in life.
That could be good.
Yeah.
But how's successful defined?
Yeah, they're, like not having problems, not having divorce, not,
that's good.
More.
That would make sense if that's the right.
And so the schools are trying to introduce humbleness, kindness.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. That's great.
And they all have to have this program in elementary school. It's required. The Catholic Church has to buy it a different way.
Oh, yeah. And if they don't succeed in the self-esteem class, do they get thrown out? Or?
Curriculum, and it's actually delivered by parents. So
no, actually, it could be good. It could be good. Yeah, I mean, of course, people can turn anything into something bad, But that sounds like it might be a little better. Anyway, so when we're raising kids in particular, whatever our capacity is, then think about what is the dialogue going on in their head in terms of how they're creating meaning. Okay? Now, if you're just forceful, what's the word I'm trying to look for? Assertive, forceful, even angry with a child, doesn't mean that they necessarily create this meaning around it, right? Right? I mean, you might get angry as a father or mother, and they can create meaning that, because if it's let me put it differently, if it's not a pattern, it's a pattern, then but the other way to help them, really, real self-esteem would be teach children how to relate, to make meaning of people who are angry, upset, irritated, even abusive. Help them create a different. Now, I told this last time, but I often quote the study of Tibetan refugees who had been imprisoned in China. There was a team of psychologists who were running a study in post-traumatic stress disorder. And so they were interviewing and doing surveys of Tibetan refugees throughout India. And they were only working with those who had been, who had been in the prison camps, in prison. And I don't know if they're only the ones tortured, but definitely that was a big part of the study. So after doing this study, this research for, I don't know how long it was, I think it was 8 or 9 months, they came back to His Holiness Dalai Lama. I think His Holiness was involved in it somehow. And they said, we have some really interesting results. We're confused. So His Holiness asked, well, what's the problem? He said, well, your community has a really low incidence of PTSD and really low incidence of symptoms of trauma, like nightmares, night terrors, anxiety, distrust. And they said, we're confused. It doesn't make sense for the level of torture and abuse that they experience. So you see, it's not the abuse. I mean, we don't want abuse, but that's not what determines good or bad in this sense. What determines it is what was the experience of the people going through it and the meaning they created. So they asked His Holiness this, and His Holiness said, well, I have 2 ideas. He said, one is, as a culture, everyone accepts the idea of cause and effect, karma. So he said, of course, they were emotionally distraught, being tortured, but they may not have been so angry at their abusers. And he said, then in some cases, so you see how that creates different meaning around the experience. They were in pain. They were, horrible pain. That goes without saying. He said, then in some cases, some very more higher practitioners, not only when they tortured, not only were they aware of this cause and effect element, but that they were also aware of generating compassion for their abusers. Pretty amazing. So I know it's a radical position, but just saying that someone's abused and they're traumatized for the rest of their life, I don't like this. It may be true, but I don't really like the description of these, poor children separated from their parents, the immigrants, because you read some of the descriptions, they're scarred for life. That itself is scarring, because now you begin to have this description, and you meet the children and say, you start relating to them as scarred, as flawed. And just, I had never said this before, but it makes sense that could be a little bit critical way to go about this. They may be, likely there are many, but to say it blanket, I don't think that's helpful. Anyway, so that's, yeah.
Well, I question, so America pushes pharmaceuticals and psychiatric medication so heavily that I question often if doctors are labeling people because they're pressured or incentivized or encouraged by pharmaceutical companies to prescribe to them. So I don't know for a fact, I don't know what study you're looking at in the other country, but you're saying that there's less instances of PTSD, and I'd like to believe that I don't know what I'm really talking about. But what I'm saying is, what if people weren't diagnosed?
What if they weren't diagnosed? Unfortunately, you're what's that expression? You're preaching to the choir. That's not. I agree with you. The question was about what if people are not diagnosed that way, right? And basically labeled that way. But that, I could go on for hours about that. So I'll just say I agree with you. Because we've talked about it before. We've talked about it, well, I have, in different classes, about how you relate to a person. I have very strong feelings about that. And there's some cutting edge, what I maybe think of cutting edge psychologies or therapies now that rail against that pathologizing, rail against that diagnosis, okay? In other words, they treat it differently because we're the same. Words create worlds, okay? But we'll go into it another time, okay? I think some people have heard me go on that soapbox. So yes, labeling. Where was I? What was I doing? Why was I talking about this? Low self-esteem. So neural pathways. So we just start creating different neural pathways. And by the way, I have one more story. So, so I have one younger friend, who was quite abused in his childhood. Physical, sexual abuse, and kind of abandonment. And, in his case, he shows a lot of signs of typical, sort of heavy drug use, and really sort of unstable emotions. Kind of almost like PTSD symptoms, or almost like borderline personality disorder kind of stuff, bipolar, maybe a better way to say it. And so some of his supporters, uncles and stuff like that, who want to retaliate against the institution he was involved with. It was institutional. He was in a particular kind of like school. And over the years, this young man became Buddhist. And so just recently, one of his advocates said, was talking about how we really need to confront that institution, we need to sue them, and this young man said, no, you don't understand. He said, I have forgiven them. And it's kind of like, well, you forgave them, but, they still did wrong. He said, no. It was due to my karma. So changing the narrative, you see. So that's the beginning of him healing. Healing meaning to be free of that description of himself, of a victim. Because when you're only a victim, more and more it closes in. So it happened. He has effects from it. He still struggles with it. But he knows that the healing part of it is not about suing them, getting back at them, being angry with them, all those kinds of things are very common in our culture. Not with everybody, by the way. Most of the people working with abuse survivors also take on the idea of forgiveness and these ideas. So that is where, in a way, he has really low self-esteem, right? Because as his identity was forming, he had a lot of sense that whatever, he was an object, he wasn't so worthwhile, because he could be used, as an object. So many things that he was told he was told many negative things about himself. So he has a lot of work to do. But the work is more and more around these other ideas around forgiveness and acceptance. Now, remember this from last week? This is last time? This is, I think, so that's Lama Yeshe, my root teacher. Lama Zopa Rinpoche. Something changed here. What? There's a statue missing. Oh, what happened? Right. Oh, but he's behind the screen now. Is it moving back to here?
I don't know. Yeah, you have blocking the Buddha.
Yeah, that's not so good. I'm going to go to hell or something. So, by the way, the interesting thing about this picture is that is me in the corner next to Lama Yeshe. I had hair then.
To the left?
Yeah, to your right. Yeah.
To my left.
Yeah, this is the last talk that Lama Yeshe gave before he passed away. Anyway, that's a whole story on itself. But
Where were you at that time?
this is in Cayton, in Nepal. He was very sick giving this talk. And Lama Yeshe usually gave a talk, it was very punctual, like 2 hours. Yeah. So at 2 hours, 2.5 hours, I was like very anxious. I was the only one that knew he was really sick. And then I couldn't tell anyone. And after 2.5 hours, he goes, okay. I thought, ooh, he's stopping now, you know. Let's have a pee-pee break. And I thought, oh no. You know, because that was unusual for him. So people getting up to go to take a break. And I stood up and I said, Lama, maybe better to stop. And he looked at me and said, sit down and shut up. That was typical for my relationship with him. I was always saying the wrong thing. So he told me once, after I made a big bungle of things, I was very, very ashamed. I was very scared to face him because I won't tell you the details because we don't have enough time, but I made a big mistake on some work I was doing for the monastery. I lost a lot of money. And I had to confront him. So I came back and went up and saw him to tell him this news about, basically got ripped off. We got ripped off. And so I go upstairs. He's out on the patio, and he turns to me and goes, so what happened? You know, Lama Yeshe is very wrathful. You know, he's not like, for me, most people he's very bubbly and warm, but some people he was wrathful with. Very strong. Freight train, like a freight train, we say. And I said, well, and I told him what happened. Lost the money. And he said, all I said was, you should know Nepalese people better than that, meaning to trust them. Because I trusted this person with the money. And they ran away with the money is what they did. And then he said, you know, it's my students who don't make any mistakes that I keep my eye on, because I know they're not doing anything. So you see, the value is. Value wasn't the money. Like you're saying, our culture, I'm generalizing, values around the money, right?
Yes.
It is. Money or your material things, you know, how could you do that? You know, how can you not wash your car? This car is pretty new. How can you just trash it like that, right? So, it's my students who make no mistakes that I keep mine. Did anyone grow up with that attitude in your family? No? Yeah, neither did I. What would it have been like if we had? You're like Tenzin. Tenzin grew up with that attitude, right? Can you not do the dishes so noisy? Okay. Right? So, are you a perfectionist? Or are you a learner? Are you controlling? Or easygoing? My friend, everyone wanted him to feel victimized. And he did have the victim story about his abuse. Now he feels fortunate. That's weird, isn't it? That's possible, though, if we develop our sense of a proper philosophy and psychology. Because of the psychology, the effect of being a victim produces no positive result. Doesn't mean people aren't victimized. We're talking about one's self-identity. Okay? And even outside of Buddhist, just in terms of really good psychotherapy, good psychology, they don't let abuse victims stay in the victimhood. They've learned it's not healthy. They have to figure out a way to become survivors, right? I think even better is fortunate. And I have had many clients that after a while of some sort of bad experience, might have gone on for a couple of years, they say they feel fortunate. My sister-in-law was in a really, really bad car accident when she was 14 with my wife and their brother and the father and a friend, and the other car person was killed. And my sister-in-law was sitting in the middle seat. This is in Australia, by the way. And they had seatbelts long before us. And she's sitting in the middle seat, and my wife was on one side and her brother on the other side. And my wife and her brother, I don't know, my wife broke her back, 3 vertebrae. I think the brother did, I don't remember. But Louise in the center broke her back. But she only had the lap belt, so it severed her spinal cord. So she was a very, very renowned actress on TV. She was like on the, one of the main, even as a 14-year-old, she was on like one of the hit shows in those days. So she was really well known. And some years ago, we were watching TV. This is like maybe, 10, 15 years ago. 10 years ago maybe. We were watching TV in Australia. And they had, we were watching, but it showed they had implanted chips in some paralyzed people. And she's paralyzed from the waist down. And they could walk, right? You've seen this before? It's very new. I mean, it's, they could get the legs to move and they could walk like with crutches. So I turned to her and I said, "Oh, Louise, if you could do that, would you have that surgery done?" And she said, "I don't think so. Why?" Not if it takes it away from someone else. But meaning, she doesn't have an identity of a wheelchair. When you meet her, you don't see her wheelchair. Do you know what I mean? So, victims you meet a victim. Right? So, how did she do that? You read all the time about people, going through terrible experiences, and they say, well, I'm better off for it. Whether they have cancer, right? Or they beat themselves up, right? Even people beat themselves up, low self-worth, over small things. And people who don't have that dynamic can go through big things without it, right? It's very interesting. How do people get that? A lot of it's in childhood, right? A lot of it's culturally determined too. A lot of it's the messages received. It's also from political stands, like what tribe you belong to and how much you identify with your tribe. If your tribe is white supremacy, that can be a feeling of very strong sense of not being good enough. Okay? So, mistake-free or mistake-maker? Which one did you grow up with, by the way? Did anyone here grow up learning how to make mistakes?
Well.
Yeah.
Lots of really well-done mistakes.
Yeah? Were they viewed as good mistakes?
No.
Oh. I think families that are good at mistake making don't call them mistakes, do they? You know what I mean? Well,
they attach it to the person. That's who they are. Is a mistake.
Those are yeah. Well, you could say, maybe I made these back. No. Mistake-free is the dysfunctional one. You don't make mistakes. You do, inside. But then the functional one, I think, is learning how to make mistakes. Like, it's my students who make no mistakes I keep my eye on. Okay? I think it's our philosophy is flawed. I think one of the things that helps the Tibetans is their philosophy that's just culturally embedded. Not the high philosophy, but just the basic cultural belief system, like karma. We don't set ourselves up we set ourselves up for self-criticism. So our sense of identity is different than in other cultures where I think it does have to do a lot with our sense of independence. It's driven into us, right? develop this identity as being something qualified and competent. But the setup for low self-worth from Buddhist psychological point of view is based on ignorance. Funny way of saying it, huh? Anyone think that's interesting? There'd be ignorance? You're waiting for the next slide, huh?
No, I'm trying to think like
What do I mean by that?
you would have to have, let's say you were victimized. But you didn't even know you were victimized. So that just became part of
Oh, you didn't know you were victimized. So you didn't have that story.
Mm-hmm. Because you didn't know. But then later on in life, you discover.
You mean later on as you meet a therapist and they tell you were victimized?
Right. And then you look at the point of awareness, recognition
So-
of it, and then acceptance of it.
Recognition and then acceptance. But why do you have to go through the victim description?
That's what I'm asking. I guess it's kind of like, where do you need to go back and recognize that, accept that, and then be able to forgive that to be able to really actually move on?
I'm going to just repeat it. Do you need to go back and look at it, recognize it, forgive it, so that you can move on? You said a lot. One thing you said that I'm not sure if it fits or not, but if you don't have, you said you were one was victimized, but you didn't know it. I don't think you can be victimized if you don't know it. So in other words, an event happened, right? Is victimization defined by the event?
No, the recognition.
It's from the description of the experience, right? I mean, ultimately, right? If the event was the victimization, then every child who was sexually abused would be victimized. Now, I'm not saying this is radical, so don't. I'm doing it to be provocative. Not every child, when they grow up, they had some sexual experience with someone, not necessarily felt like a victim, right? I mean, it's possible, right? Yeah, it's not common. I mean, the common is they feel abused, but many think negative effects of it. But it's possible there was a negative effect, and it has happened. I'm not promoting it, but the victimization is a mental experience. So what I said about therapists, I had one of my students from Nepal, one of the monks. It's very bizarre. I moved back here in 88, and probably like 89, 90, 91, I turned on the TV in the daytime, which I don't normally do. Turned on, it was Oprah Winfrey. And she was talking about, she had on her show a woman whose son was recognized as incarnate Lama, a Western boy. And whether that was abusive or not. There's whole, how it's this talk show thing. And then, lo and behold, there was my old student, who was now an adult, in the audience. It had to do with Westerners who were put into monasteries. And I knew him very well. I knew him very well, because he was a Westerner, and we often took care of him during the holidays and stuff like that. And there he was, completely transformed. He was, he was in the audience, but they knew he was there, so he was one of the ones they called on to participate. He was so angry. He was a whole different person. And I just thought, what therapist has he been talking to? And about, I don't know how many years later, some years later, he committed suicide. I mean, you could see it. That wasn't his, when I knew him, that wasn't his nature. Now, I think he got bullied in the monastery. I don't know really details of what happened. But I just felt, and I don't know this for a fact at all, but just from my feeling, watching him, I thought, this language he's speaking is therapy language. And bad therapy. There's really good therapy too, of course. That was not the good one, from my point of view. I have no idea. I know he did work with a psychologist for a long time, a therapist. So he had experiences in the monastery, maybe got bullied. I don't know if there was sexual anything, I don't think so. But I don't know what happened. And so then as he got older, he created meaning around that experience. So the data is there, right? The data is there. We're not going to deny the data, but we have to be very careful how we make meaning of the data. That's relative. It's not absolute. And a lot of things are taught as absolutes. If you get bullied, you're going to be have low self-esteem, and you're going to go, whatever. Well, it's maybe likely, but you can also have a whole different way of describing it, which has a different effect. Okay, it's how we make meaning. It's the neural pathways again. I know this is provocative, and I'm going to get in trouble, I'm sure. Anyone online arguing with me? No? Okay.
Well, you had the list of the left, the good and bad, or I forget. But, what if you're not all that? Maybe you're in the, sometimes you feel like you're a perfectionist, and sometimes you feel like you're a learner. I mean, because it's not so black and white.
No, of course not.
That you just lose these negative.
But some of us, I think of the way, no, of course, right? It's degrees. Some people are really, on the negative side, let's say. But typically it's more in certain contexts, like at work. Are you a perfectionist at work? Right? Or with your children, like how you raise your children. Are you a perfectionist with how you raise your children? Or with your spiritual path, are you a perfectionist with your spiritual path? Right? Because when we are perfectionists in one of those areas, of course that's a myth. There is no perfect. Perfectionist means you have to avoid mistakes. So when a mistake happens, I was just thinking about Donald Trump.
Who isn't?
I have to be careful because, of course, not everyone shares my political point of view, and there's people from all over might be listening. And this is archived also, and people access it. But there's something interesting. I think it's just factual. He never apologizes. He never when I say never, I think never admits a mistake. So that could be thought of as a kind of perfectionism, maybe. So when you're a perfectionist, you can't handle mistakes. So you have people develop different strategies, right? Like in my family, growing up, a perfectionist kind of mother. So we didn't make mistakes. It was really great. Went through life, not one mistake.
But that's just her denial.
We didn't make them. When of course, right? So what it meant was, when there was a mistake, it didn't get labeled a mistake. It got labeled something like, well, something wrong with you. Like I remember her saying, I don't know why you aren't getting all A's. You got tested. You should be getting all A's. So it's like blaming something else. Perfectionists blame. They blame everything and everyone else. And saying, okay, so controlling is another thing. People who are very... Anyway, we won't go into control.
I'm just thinking, how do you get from here to...
How do you get... Oh, well, we got to talk... That's my job, right? Urs remind me that this time I'm going to talk about solutions. I'm not sure I have solutions, but we can explore a few. How about that? So this is kind of a solution. So when we talk about the setup for low self-worth is ignorance. And ignorance of what? It's ignorance of what really just what is. Okay? So this is where we enter. Now we can really segue into Buddhist thought as well. Because what we're ignorant of, there's many things. Okay, now we're going strict Buddhist psychology. In Buddhist psychology, the whole in Buddhist philosophy, all problems arise from ignorance. So now we can so if that's true, we should be able to use this problem. There are many, right? We've talked about problems from different kinds. We framed them in different ways, right? In this class, right? We've done low self-esteem. We've done shame. We've done all kinds of. What else have we done?
Grief, I think.
Huh? Grief. We did grief and loss. What happened right after the election? What did we do?
Drink.
Huh?
Drink.
I'm trying to think what the problem was that we talked about. People were angry or scared. Anyway, so all of these we can talk about from the point of view of ignorance. This is the real solution. So, and I'll talk about other solutions, I promise. But we have to set up the context. In Buddhist thought, so it's because we don't see things correctly that we struggle, in this case, today's class, with low self-worth, self-doubt, self-criticism. Okay? And that's why we're talking about what is like, self-criticism is the thing we're talking about, or self-judgment. So when something happens, it's usually a mistake. However we define mistake, that's when the self-criticism, self-doubt, self-judgment comes. Okay, so we all clear what we're talking about? Now, when I mentioned to Tenzing about and Solon's Dalai Lama didn't kind of get that. You mean you make a mistake? Well, you made a mistake. What does self-judgment have to do about it? It's actually quite profound. Well, it's because we are ignorant of how our identity exists, okay, for one thing, okay, and ignorant of how things exist outside of us. And then we go down this track. Okay. What we don't see, so let's think, everyone should think of an example when they beat themselves up, or I don't know what it is, like sometimes in academics or sometimes in job promotions. You didn't get one or the other person did. Or in sports, athletics, some people really struggle with that, maybe losing because they're competitive, or not being so good and wanting to be better and feeling ashamed that they're not better. So I think that's big for men, maybe women too, I don't know. Previously it wasn't big for women. Now women are more in athletics than men. Family, your kids aren't doing so well in school. How's that feel? Right? For a lot of parents, that's embarrassing. And what do? I'm not a good mom. I'm not a good dad. Now, that's because of ignorance. That is not why your children aren't doing well in school. That is not why you're not doing well in school. That is not why you're doing poorly in your job. Okay? These things, what we don't know, what we're ignorant of is facts, truths. Impermanence, interconnectedness, causes and conditions, and that we really don't have control. And other things. There's many. That Buddhism talks about these ignorances. Okay, we don't see things correctly. So, for example, no control. We think we can control, like a business. Anyone here have a failed business? Did you beat yourself up?
Well, after 10 different failed businesses, you just kind of give up.
After 10 failed businesses, you give up. But no, honestly, though, in the beginning, I bet you question yourself, right?
When I first started failing.
Yeah. And when you lose a job, anyone lose a job, get fired? Yeah. How'd you do? How'd you feel? Did you question your abilities or qualities?
Yeah, I took a couple months off at that time to process everything. It wasn't a quick bounce back.
Yeah. Were you down on yourself?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even though I didn't deserve it, but yeah.
Right. Anyone else?
Yeah, it was hard to process.
Hard to process. So those kinds of, can people really identify something that if it's not one of those, it's something that you will begin to beat yourself up about. A lot of times with our children, career, partners, So from a Buddhist point of view, losing your job, for example, or your children not doing well, is actually factual. It's not an exception. It's kind of the rule. But we're taught culturally, in our families, that those are exceptions. You know, if you had, James, if you just thought about it more, you did more, strategic planning, right? And you worked with a consultant, and you made a budget, and you weren't under capitalized, right? Yeah. You would have been successful because you have control. You just didn't. You could have controlled that, right? That's how we go. If you just, if you disciplined your child a little more when he was growing up, and didn't put him down as much when he wasn't getting good grades. So we have this idea of control. But actually, that's a myth. Of course, we can do positive and negative. I'm not saying about that. We try our best. But does that determine, do you have control whether your child succeeds in school? Do you have control really whether your business succeeds? No, you don't.
I mean, after I thought, like my job, I spent like 4 years thinking about it, and I finally figured out that I was like a train, and I was just headed for that cliff.
Uh-huh.
And it was a track, and the train's on the track.
Right.
There's no other track.
Isn't that interesting? So you didn't really have control. Yeah. Because as someone on a track, the only control is maybe fast and slow or something.
Yeah, I could either go off the cliff really fast, or I could make a slow
descent or a fast one. Yeah, yeah.
How do we balance taking responsibility with lack of control?
How do you balance taking responsibility with lack of control? So not having control doesn't mean we don't do anything. We don't try. We don't do anything. Of course we do, but it's with a different attitude. Right? So let's say I have, this is a good example. I know someone who has started a school or trying to start a school, and they have really good values that they want to teach in a school, more progressive. They cannot get funding. Do they stop? No, they keep trying. But they don't have they don't have control over that, actually. And then the school down the street, there's this kind of a basic school, a charter school with no real interest, gets all this funding. That's where we stand. So normally people will go, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Why can't we get the funding? Why do they get the funding? We don't know enough wealthy people. Or our PR is bad, right? It's that you do what you do the best you can. Sometimes, it doesn't even matter. Bad PR, no PR, and you get funding.
What about personality clashes, and that's why you lost the job, or personality conflict?
You didn't lose a job because of personality clashes. That's a description, right? Doesn't mean it didn't. Let me clarify. She was saying about what if you lost a job because of personality clashes. So we talk about causes and we do talk about conditions. They're not the same thing. So the cause of losing the job was. The conditions for losing it was you butted heads. You might not know if you did, but butting heads with the other person, right? They could have been fired, though. So the cause is different than the condition. Those are the conditions. The cause of losing the job is different. Okay? That has to do with a lot of other more subtle things that are going on in the mind. Okay? So conditions are important, but we don't have that much control. Conditions like a hurricane, right? A hurricane is a condition for people to lose their homes, right? Totally not in our control, though, isn't it?
So like in a romantic relationship,
Mm-hmm.
Can you give me an example in a romantic? Because I want to understand how to feel like you don't have control, but also you're taking responsibility.
So the control, you don't have control, but you take responsibility. There's a lot of levels to that. One level is that, I think the place that, probably the beginning and end, is you do have control over your emotions and mind, but you don't, right? You have the potential to control. That's the only thing you can control. You can't control whether your partner gets angry at you for leaving a dish out. Most of the time, you get hypervigilant about putting the dishes away, right? And then he still gets mad, or she, right? But so the place, this is Buddhists, the term in Tibetan for a Buddhist is a nangpa. Remember? So nangpa means inner being. Now, there's many levels what that means. But I like to just think, okay, when you deal with the world from an inner locus first, then I think you're Buddhist. So you make the world better first from inwardly. That's it. You make your relationship with your partner first inwardly. It doesn't mean it's going to work like you're going to, that he's not going to still be depressed. You don't have control. Can you not be depressed? You have a little control. When you start to think about and exercise it. If you don't think about it, don't exercise it, don't have the wisdom, you don't have control either, by the way. We're under control. We're under the control of no control. It's about human potential, right? Free will. We have free will, but we don't exercise it. So if you don't exercise it, will gets determined for you. And can you exercise it just by deciding? No. Practice.
So you take responsibility for what you can control, and then you have the wisdom to know what you can't control.
Yeah, well, it changes as we evolve. We get more and more control, right? But not over the external environment so much. I can't control there's many things you can't control because of the group. We say group karma. So, yeah, you can control whether you're irritated or affected by the pollution. But we don't have the control yet to eliminate the pollution. The potential's there, but there's too many other people involved.
Well, if somebody's bringing up, with someone that you're with is always kind of bringing up negative emotion in you.
Bringing up negative emotion in you?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. They can't bring up negative emotion in you. No, sorry.
Well, if you're...
That's because we don't have control.
Doing it. But if you're feeling negative emotion when you're with this...
Yeah, that happens all the time. That's human experience.
Constant, then you're creating bad karma, aren't you?
Well, let's forget the word karma, because some people don't like that word. So again, we go back on a physical level in neural pathways. Yeah, this person's with you, and he's always criticizing you, and it makes you emotional and gets you pissed off, makes you feel hurt, makes you feel less than, all those things. That's reestablishing those neural pathways. So you could talk about karma in that way, right? More and more imprints, those imprints. So when he's doing that, you have another choice. What our habitual thing is creating more negative imprints, isn't it? I'm no good, he's no good, all that kind of stuff. I feel sad, I feel depressed. Those are negative emotions. That's like negative imprints. Can you believe that you could? Of course you can do those, because those lamas and those Tibetans that got tortured, they didn't do that. I'm romanticizing it, but they didn't do that. They didn't make those negative imprints. They already knew they were being tortured because of their previous negative imprints. That means karma, right? So they didn't want to make more of it for next lifetime or some future time. So you experience it that level. I mean, that's a very profound level. I mean, if you're in an abusive relationship, you can leave, maybe. Right? Many people don't. Why? Such strong imprints. So that's why we don't really have much control. Drives you nuts if you're a counselor trying to work with those situations. No, seriously. It is so frustrating.
Well, that's what I'm thinking is that she was saying responsibility. I mean, at some point...
We are responsible.
If you stay in that situation and you're choosing to stay, you're saying we may not have that choice.
Well, we know that most times we don't, because we stay in it.
Is that because we're...
Potentially we have a choice, huh?
Isn't that just attachment?
Yeah, but attachment's the problem of everything. So we can't say, is that just attachment? Because attachment's the problem in everything. Even very subtle levels.
But is it? I guess what I'm just saying, isn't it at some point your responsibility to yourself and to others?
Yes.
To remove.
Yeah.
Get yourself out of that situation.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah.
I'm not saying.
We're not arguing. We're agreeing, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. What I'm presenting is that it is your responsibility to yourself and to others to get yourself out of that bad situation, negative situation, harmful situation, right? Then what we're adding to that is you may not be able to do that because you don't have that level of control. The potential is there. And as we develop, guess what? We develop more and more control, more and more power. All of a sudden you're driving over Highway 17 and everyone's cutting you off and you're not getting angry. Or I'm driving over Highway 17 and I can see I'm late because I stopped and grabbed a coffee to go and they were sort of slow in there. But I had a choice, right? You can become more and more in control. I saw Ur's face and I thought, oh my God, I'm in so much trouble. I'm joking. But I could have. Couldn't I have? There was no trouble, right? And it was what it was.
A really good example, actually, if I may. Can I?
Yeah.
Is women in abusive relationships who often don't have the desire,
Yes.
they don't have the control over their desire to leave.
Right.
So they don't actually want to leave, even though they know they should want to leave, because they can't control their desire enough because their attachment and neural pathways.
It's also fear. I mean, it makes a lot of sense why in the stereotype of women not leaving abusive relationships. I totally get it. That's conditions. It makes total sense. Everything makes sense, by the way. Yes?
I always, when I try to, like, for instance, my wife's always on the case because they make all these messes. And I grew up in an extremely messy house.
Oh, right. Messy house, so...
Other people, and she's very neat.
Uh-huh.
So what I do is I say, well, today I cleaned up a little better than yesterday.
Right.
And I will probably never reach her level.
No.
And I've already accepted that.
Right.
And so each day I try to get just a little bit better.
So here's the each day, I'll just repeat, each day to get better at not making a mess because you grew up with being messy. But here's the challenge, or here's the question you could ask. The messy guy, the messy mindset. And I'm not judging, because I don't really know. Is that messy mindset a more productive mindset for you, or would the other one be more productive, or is there another one? Do you know what I mean? So when you start seeing, you take accountability. See, even being messy becomes part of our accountability in our spiritual practice of developing our mind. So you might clue in it someday, going, "Wow, now I see the mind that's messy, and that mind is not productive, not helpful," right? Then you work on it slowly from the mental point of view, or you look at it from the point of view of compassion. You know, you love your wife and you want her to be happy, and you know that being clean isn't going to really make her happy, but it may disturb her mind less. So then you can do it from the point of view of compassion. But from the point of view is, I'm such a slob, and I'm never going to get over this because my parents, this is the way they raised me. They never told me to clean my room. And I really want to do it better for my wife. God, what's wrong with me? Like that.
Well, you don't say what's wrong with you, but you do recognize that you're starting at a different point.
Right.
I mean, it's just like those llamas who don't. They start at a very different point.
Yes.
So
training is different.
You can't really compare yourself.
Well, you've been trained. I'm not just saying you. I mean, it's a lot of you've been trained to be messy. For good reasons. I don't know what they are, but they're good reasons.
Maybe good reasons.
Yeah, they're good reasons. They're just not such.
Kind of look at her and I said, you're cleaning up, but are you cleaning up or are you just simply staying busy?
Yeah, but see, that's. Sorry, James, because I know you well. That's irrelevant. Nice try. Okay, so ignorance of the nature. I still have time. Good. Ignorance of the nature of our identity. This is very, very, very important. So this is where low self-esteem comes from. We're not aware of what the self is, even in self-worth. We don't even know what the self is. We give all this energy to this self, and we don't even know what it is. In the self and low self-esteem, or low self-worth, or self-criticism. Who are you criticizing? Do you know? No. So, in Buddhist psychology philosophy, this idea of self is completely wrong. And when we criticize that self, it makes it wronger, because you're strengthening the misconception. So this is really kind of a negative practice that we do of low self-esteem, self-criticism. It's actually it's like, when I was taking care of Lama Yeshe and when he was very ill and before he passed away, Lama Zopa Rinpoche and myself and 2 monks were in seclusion in New Delhi, and out in the kind of outside the city. And one day, I was eating my lunch with Rinpoche usually, so one day, after all these years, he passed me this hot chili. We call it achar. Yeah, mango achar. It means not chutney. Chutney, people here make a mistake. Chutney is the sweet one. Achar is the hot one. So, it passed, and like my life was transformed because we were always eating kind of crummy food, not great food. And all of a sudden, wow, transformed. So every day I look forward to the mango achar, or mango chili. And then one of Lama Yeshe's teachers, the Geshe Rabten Rinpoche, came to visit Lama Yeshe. And no one was coming. I mean, a few people came, but generally we were in seclusion. And I wasn't there. That day I had to go to do shopping or something, so I wasn't there for lunch. And I came back, and the next day, there's the chili, the food. And of course, I always pass the Rinpoche first. And he says, no, I don't eat that anymore. Just like that, right? I said, oh, what do you mean? I still joke with Rinpoche. I said, you made me an addict. And I still can't give up. I'm still fighting that. He said, Rinpoche, what do you mean? You don't eat that? He said, well, when Geshe Rabten Rinpoche was here yesterday, who's one of his teachers also, was here yesterday, I passed the chili to him. And he said, this food is in the nature of suffering. Why are you asking me to put suffering on top of suffering? By burning his mouth or whatever. The food's already crummy. So, which is very, very high kind of perception, because all of this stuff, from a realized being, all of this stuff is crummy. It's in the nature of suffering. It doesn't change the suffering when we put, some fruit, something sweet in there, or ice in there, or whatever, right? So this this self-criticism, this self-doubt, this putting down, is putting suffering on top of suffering. Do you get that? Things are already kind of messed up because we're seeing the self incorrectly. That's suffering. In Buddhist thought, we have 3 levels of suffering, 3 kinds of. We have the suffering of pain, which is, we all know that one. Even animals know that one. And then we have the suffering of change. We don't know that everything is in the nature of change, so we get, oh, I'm so glad to have this water. But this water is in the nature of change. I'm going to get thirsty again, but I attach to it. That's the human nature. We attach to everything. If we understand the nature of the water very clearly, perceptually, we won't get attached anymore. Because you see what it really is. This thing looks like that. This water looks like that. But this is not what it really is. Okay? This looks solid, independently, concretely existing refreshment when it's not. Lama Zopa Rinpoche, Lama Yeshe, the Dalai Lama, Karmapa, these beings, other beings that we don't know about, see the water correctly. We don't. That's ignorance. Okay? If we see things correctly, we don't have low self-worth. We don't have any, our suffering decreases. Suffering in this sense, dissatisfaction, confusion. Okay? That's the whole problem, that we don't see it correctly. Okay? We see it as, this water, okay, whether you talk about water, or you talk about your children, or you talk about the job that you lost, okay, this is very important. Take one of your examples, and we get hurt, right? We get hurt, and then we beat ourselves up. Now, we could just get hurt and not beat ourselves up. That'd be an improvement. Okay? Now, for Lama Yeshe, he doesn't even get hurt. Because this idea of self, he understands how it really exists. There's a person there, don't get me wrong. But we don't understand when we say, I this and I that, that's the self. And we have a misconception of how that exists. That's the central theme in Buddhist thought. And it takes lifetimes to really get it. I mean, to realize, and not necessarily lifetime, you could do it in this lifetime too. So the way we see this self, so if I say to James, I say anyone, Urs, James, Kim, Jody, it's like if I say your name, right? When I say Jody, Urs is not thinking he's talking to me, right? Right? There's a sense of, oh, right? If I say James, James feels something that we don't feel when I say that. You understand? That's his sense of self, identity. That sense that he has, and I have it, we have it every instant. We have it right now. Even though I'm not calling out your name, we have a solid sense of I. That's wrong. There is a James, there's a Karuna, but not the one we think, not the one we identify with. So because we identify with that, a couple things we see. One thing we see it as a permanent. Now permanent means unchanging, moment to moment, instant to instant, fixed. Now if I ask you, is your self permanent or impermanent? Does it change moment to moment or not? How many say it changes moment to moment? Yeah, if it didn't change moment to moment, you would feel the same you did when you were born, right? Or when you're 3 years old, whatever. When your identity, right? So it is impermanent. Do you perceive it as impermanent or permanent? Permanent. That's one thing right there. Big mistake. So when I say to Tenzing about the dishes, one way we could fantasize about that, Tenzing, could you do the dishes a little more quieter? Oh, sure. The Tenzing that I spoke to no longer existed when he responded. I mean, there's a continuity, by the way. But that Tenzing, if he really was aware of it, the impermanent nature, the changing nature of his identity, which it is, the one that the identity that received the rude criticism or whatever comment didn't exist a moment or two later, right? I'm not telling there is continuity, but a river is continuous. But when you point to the river there, a second later, that is a different spot, right? We don't see that, correct? Anyone live in that reality? Don't tell me. If you live in it, you wouldn't tell me anyway, because you'd be humble. So that's one thing about the self. That screws things up right there. And then we think of ourselves as sort of isolated, like independent, don't we? When you're walking, like right now, aren't you feeling like there you are and here I am? Could we say, you could point here, as just sort of a isolated being. Correct? You get the feeling? These are very advanced ideas, but they are the ones that are going to cure us of low self-esteem. So that is false also. It's like, I have the word there, unitary. Unitary means one. Okay? But we're not one. We're many, right? We're composed of parts, aren't we? And even our mind is parts. Okay? We have happiness, we have sadness, we have, I'm hungry, now I'm not hungry, not happy, now I'm tired. I get emotional, right? I get peaceful. I have arms and fingers and hands. I mean, but that's not how we see I'm here as a solid unitary thing. This one's a hard one to get, but I think you can get it. If you saw yourself made up of parts, okay, forget about the impermanent one right now, but you're a bunch of parts, right? Are you a bunch of parts? Are we a bunch of parts or not? Maybe we have to agree on this. Is this a new idea? A bunch of parts would mean like, you're a mom, right? So if you're not a bunch of parts, you'd only be a mom. Right? We have many personalities, right? Many identities. So we're not unitary, but we think we are. And a lot of times we identify with one identity and we go, that's who I am, right? We see that a lot. Like doctors or experts. They really become experts. Even my dad, I love my dad. He was a very kind man. But when I try to have these, we grew up in the 60s, so we're trying to have these discussions about corrupt governments, and it was all new ideas, Vietnam and all. And every time we'd have those kind of conversations, he talked to me as a businessman. He somehow had that same kind of approach as he had with his business. He was a businessman, as he had with his business. So I think his identity was very strongly, I'm a businessman. So he brought that, right? So that's unitary, but we're not that. Okay? And the last one is, these are not all of them, but these are like the basic, the stepping blocks. I mean, is it we see ourselves as independent of everything, when actually we're dependent. So if someone says something to you, it affects your mood, doesn't it? Or if you go outside and you look out and it's dark or it's cold, it affects you, right? But we think we're independent, but we're not. We're dependent on we're dependent constantly. Okay? So that dependency is an antonym to independent, isn't it? You can't be independent and dependent. So which one are we? We're dependent. Our identity is a dependent arising. So for me to feel upset about what you're talking about with your job, right? So to feel upset with that, it's dependent upon someone saying something, and it's dependent upon me feeling bad about myself, and it's dependent upon having that emotion inside of me, and it's dependent upon has someone got me the job, and it's dependent upon millions and millions of factors. But we don't see it. We say independent. I independently am no good because I just got criticized for my job. So that's all ignorance. That's not the way things are, but that's how we relate as independent, unitary, unchanging beings or identity. That's where this whole thing starts. How can you have low self-worth if the self is really these three things? If the self is impermanent, it is a connected entity, and if it is dependent, how can you have low self-esteem? Not possible.
Take away the self, there's just the word low.
Yeah. What is low? You could, yeah, that's okay. Just low is okay. If there's no self, it doesn't.
It's just low.
It's just low. There's lowness. Okay. So another way so what this implies is actually we are, I never say this normally, but we are flawed. I mean, we can analyze later what I mean by we are flawed. But there are flaws. The human nature, there's lots of flaws. We get angry. We get sad. And by the way, the human nature is flawed. Why? We think it's not. But constantly we get what we don't want, isn't it? Not constantly, like in every instant, but generally going through life, going through a day, we encounter what we don't want. I didn't want that red light at whatever it was down there, right? Yeah. A lot of things. We encounter what we don't want. Right now, maybe we'll encounter what we don't want. Maybe we don't want to be here anymore. We want to go home. Or we don't get what we want. So one is encountering what we don't want. The other thing is not getting what we do want. Like we really want friendship or a partner, but we don't get it. Oh, and the other one is we want friendship and we get something else. Right? And irritating. I mean, friends always turn irritating anyway. That's the way it is. There's no perfection. So this idea, this is when Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths, and the first truth he taught was the truth of suffering. That's what I'm getting at here. Things are in the nature of suffering, and suffering does not mean pain in this sense. Suffering means dissatisfaction and confusion. Okay? Like even those of us who studied these ideas, oh yeah, I really get it. Yes, I'm not an independent being. I am dependent. I'm not a permanent being. I'm impermanent. I'm not unitary. I'm connected. Even still, right? because this flawedness, I can't just be there. I have to actually practice now. I have to train. That's because of all the flaws. One thing that helps as a, not just a metaphor, but in truth, is this body. Okay, this body actually is in the nature of flawedness. Is that a word? Flawedness. Okay? In the traditional language, they say the body is in the nature of suffering. I'm trying to avoid that word. It's in the nature of problems. And so if you think about, if it wasn't in the nature of problem, right? Why do we work on creating more comfortable chairs? Why when we come in the room, we're looking for a comfortable place? What would be comfortable for us? If the body was comfortable, we could sit anywhere, right? It's not comfortable, the body. It's a problem. Why do they have to make your seat adjust in your car? Some cars have a little lumbar support, right? The newer ones. Why? Why do you all of a sudden now in the cars, they have 14 speakers? Remember when it was just 2 inside the door? Okay? Why do you take vitamins? Why do you take medicine? Why do we eat? The body's in the nature of a problem. It's just an instant way. Just don't eat tonight. The body, right? It turns on us. It's not. And then it's all full of sickness, all those kinds of things. That's just the body. So the mind is similar. So we are in the nature of problems, okay? We can get out of it, but that's what it is. So with all this stuff, how many times, so the body in the nature of problems, then we gain some weight, and then we develop low self-worth about being overweight. Even if we're not. That doesn't make sense. The body's in the nature of problems. It does things like get overweight. It does things like get flabby. It does things like get not so athletic, right? Sorry, am I depressing everybody? The point here is that's the nature of reality. So there's no value in self-criticism. Okay, no value in low self-esteem. Okay, I got 15 minutes, or should I go to some solutions? Explain the problem quite well, aren't they? We have no. This is what you were asking. We have no control till we take control. So you were asking, right? Okay, so there's different antidotes or strategies for dealing with low self-worth. So I like this one about becoming friends with yourself. So one of the big ones now, which does come from Buddhist thought, but it's a bit of a twist on it. Let me just see. Well, we'll just go. Okay. When we understand how ignorance creates our reality, we begin to take control. Okay, that's, what do you call that? That's like self-mastery, right? I already wrote what it says. We're ignorant of our identity. We're ignorant of the nature of identity and everything else. Okay, so what to do? So there's many things. So I looked at this, and I thought of these 3 things. I think I have a 4th one later on. So what I call narrative mindfulness. I don't think everyone's... I've invented this. I think I invented this term. I don't know. I might get in trouble. So narrative mindfulness, you can actually practice, for people who do some mental training, like mindfulness training, you can begin to integrate this in your meditation, or just if you're haven't practiced yet with meditation and mindfulness, you can just integrate this in your life. What this involves is, so there's a voice that goes on, and I think people are aware of this. I hope they have to become aware. First step is, in this thing we're talking about in terms of low self-worth, self-criticism, self-judgment, there's a voice, isn't there? And we have to become familiar with it. Like, it's a thing about when you come in last place, or not chosen to be on a team. You remember back there, well, for guys, maybe girls too, but, not being chosen or being the last one chosen. Then, or getting fired, or losing your job, or losing your business. You got to identify for what it is for you. Okay, or liking or putting faith in a new friend or partner, and then they don't call you, and they don't call you, and they don't call you. But don't you start spinning out? I don't know about you, but that's common to spin out. Like, you make up all these. Okay, so and then you go to what's wrong with me and all that sort of. So the beginning thing is really to see, for us to see this is a voice. There's a voice going on in our head. We don't even know it's a voice. We just think it's reality. Right? And it can take many, many different forms. It can just be ashamed, embarrassed. It can be putting yourself down. Many, many. It doesn't have you have to discover that nagging little voice, not little, that nagging voice in your head. You have to discover what's your style. So let's say in a relationship that's not so, not abusive, but, the partner puts you down a lot. What do you do with that? What voice is activated? Defensive. Yeah. So when he's not in the room, or she, that mind continues, doesn't it? It's kind of on a loop. So it could be anger, but it's hurt, right? So the first thing is to see it as a voice. You objectify it. This is the narrative mindfulness. You objectify it, and then you can watch it. Okay? Just watch and listen. Now, what's going to happen at first, you're going to watch and listen for a split second, and then all of a sudden you get caught up in it. Yeah, well, when he comes home, then I'm going to tell him this, and I'm going to tell him that, right? Or I'm going to leave. When he comes back, I'm not going to be here when he leaves. When he comes back, I'm going to leave. Or, all that law. Well, maybe I can get a lawyer. All that. Or maybe you cry, right? Feeling very powerless. So that you need to objectify that voice, whatever it is. Can anyone have another example? Is that a good enough example? Okay.
A voice trying to correct your behavior or something. Yeah. And it's trying to figure out a way.
Figure it out. It's really about figuring out, right?
Yeah. So, how you can do this?
Yeah.
You can do this.
Right. Or it's an argument against the person, with the person who mistreated you.
So it's a story.
Huh?
It's your story.
It's your story, but you objectify it more, and you can actually hear this annoying voice. It actually gets to be annoying. It's one thing that because you can't, like the one that when you can't fall asleep because you're upset.
Yeah. Same
thing.
Why do that? It's so useless.
It's so useless, and then you start telling yourself how useless it is, right? That's still part of the voice. And then you go, such an idiot, And then you got, I don't know, maybe then you go smoke a joint or something because you just got or you take some sleepy meds, or you go to have a drink or something. You got to silence that thing, right? Because it's just oppressive. The way to silence it is this: what we're talking about for good is you step back from it and you just watch it as best you can. And you won't be able to do it more than a few seconds at first, but over time you can do it longer and longer and longer. And it's just like the Wizard of Oz. Okay, Wizard of Oz. Everyone remember Wizard of Oz? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So go back and watch it. So the Wizard of Oz, the original version. So if Wizard of Oz, Dorothy's going through Oz, and they're all hearing this big loud voice resonating through all. Remember Oz, and then they just got to get to the wizard because he has the answer: courage, intelligence. He's going to get Dorothy back home, right? Huh?
He's going to fix it.
He's going to fix it. And then they get to the place, and there's a big booming voice, behind that, whatever it was. And then they're all intimidated, and this is the wizard, it's like God. And then what happens?
The tiny little guy behind
He's a little guy on a stool. His feet don't even reach the ground. Who discovered him? Toto did. The dog. That's what this is like. Okay? You have to, when we watch that voice more and more and more, it'll look like that little man on that stool where his feet don't reach the ground. Okay? He's still shouting into that microphone or whatever it is thing. Okay? But then as more you just observe him, so you don't get hooked. When you get hooked, he stays perpetuated. His life continues. His life is lost when you don't get hooked. Okay, so this narrative mindfulness is about researching that voice. You watch it, you listen to it, but you don't get hooked. You try to stay mindful of it. Okay, like looking at traffic down below from a tall building. Okay, now you can't do it at first, but more you do it, it loses its power. So you want to look. You want to start looking at its hooks. How does it hook you? Its strategies. So you're really objectifying this voice. Now, up to this point, it's not objectified. It's like, that's me. I'm really screwed up. Okay? The fact that it's not you, if it was you, you couldn't watch it, could you? The eye can't see itself, can it? But the fact that you can see it means it's not who you are. It's a big trick. So hypnotizing, you think that's who you are. You're really a mess. Right? Well, if you're really a mess, who's hearing that you're really a mess? Okay? So what's its life support system? What keeps it alive? What does it tell you about yourself? What it tells you on how it works on your behalf? You know, that's the thing. It convinces you it's helpful, right? If you don't do this, if you don't listen to me, you're not going to get out of this situation. It's that keeps you in this situation. It's such a con game.
It's called the default. Yeah.
Yeah. And you want to know how it hijacks your identity. Well, it does it by convincing you don't know better. This is stupid. What did Karuna say in that class? This is ridiculous. You have to do it yourself, by the way. Okay? So that's about narrative mindfulness. And develop an alternative, preferred narrative. Okay? Change the narrative. This is practice. So when you lost your job, when your business has failed, okay? When your partner's mean, change the narrative. Because the one you got going perpetuates it. Now, what would be an alternative narrative? Well, this is where we can really look to Buddhist thought for help. Okay? But it's more authentic. It's more preferred. Do you prefer that one, how you tell yourself you're a loser or whatever, you messed up and whatever it is, you're not attractive, you're an idiot for keep going into these situations. Do you like that one? It's not even helpful. If it was helpful, I wouldn't suggest stopping it. I don't think it ever produced anything positive. So you want to find a more preferred narrative. Now, I would say, now in psychology, talk about, positive affirmations, all that kind of stuff. I don't really like that thing, or reframing. It can be a little bit helpful. What I would like it to be more authentic. Okay? Now, the authentic part of it is many things. Who do you prefer to be? And when we talk about whom do you prefer to be, we're talking about more in a much more authentic way. Not like, much more grounded. I prefer to be someone who doesn't get hooked by that voice. I prefer to be someone who's compassionate. I prefer to be someone who's wiser. That kind of thing. Okay? Not this one. Hang on. Not this one. Hang on. That one. Remember him?
I was waiting for him.
I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me. Remember him? Everyone knows him from Saturday Night Live. And it's just, I'm showing my, yeah. Do you remember anyone else? Just him? Go back and watch. This is, what was his name? Something Stuart
Smalley.
Stuart Smalley. He was a therapist. Positive affirmations. It's really good. You got to go back. It's just crazily funny, empathetic. Okay. Now, so a preferred narrative, okay, it's one that's authentic to you. It's in you already. It's in you already. So this is very, very important. James, if I can use you as an example, with your 10 failed businesses, okay, so that narrative could really take us over, right? Now, the preferred narrative is something that is authentic. It's part of you. Now, so it's not about reframing. It comes from someone else. The reframe is like, well, James, just remember how hard you tried. You took risks. Now, that might be authentic for you, but if it's someone else's, I suggest finding your own. So I would say to you, well, what is it you learned? And what would be, I mean, the preferred narrative, which I think you have, by the way, it sounds like, would be something like, well, I didn't really have control over it. I tried my best, right? People who don't make mistakes, I keep my eye on. I learn from it. Those kinds of things. I don't like it, but it's also, now you're Buddhist, so you also think about karma. It's my karma, unfortunately, but I did expire those imprints. Some point I will be successful. Maybe not this life, I don't know. But I stuck to it. That kind of thing. Yeah, I didn't get depressed. Those are the preferred. And also, I'd much rather prefer doing something. I don't know if it's you, but it might be. I'd much prefer doing something and failing than doing nothing. Settling for that tech job in that little cubicle with this 100 other people, or I'm just projecting. Yeah. Okay. Then you enhance that. That's, again, if we go to just science point of view, that also changes your. You activate those neural pathways that are a bit dormant. Okay. We have them, the positive ones. So I'm going to go real fast because we just have a minute or two, okay? So then the big one that's sort of developing these days is about self-compassion. So this is the second, method number 2. And this one's a little tricky for us Buddhists to talk about. But it seems relevant, and it doesn't mean, a lot of times this can seem self-indulgent. But I think in terms of low self-worth and self-doubt, self-judgment, self-compassion is just like one of the main, because I'm going to go fast because there's books on self-compassion. What I want to say is that it's kind of like a big, really good beginning step in healing, getting out of this, which has to do with forgiveness, but it just means seeing yourself and treating yourself how you would treat others. So that avoids overindulgence, because most time we don't overindulge someone. But it's just very simple practice in this sense, just because we only have a minute. But it's just to see yourself as another person. What would you tell your friend? What would you tell your daughter? What would you tell your partner? I mean, if you're in kindness, then why don't you treat yourself that way? It's really weird we don't. Okay? So this is about being gentle and understanding with ourselves, understanding versus condemning. So, by the way, I didn't put it here, but this one's very, very important. What keeps it from being indulgent is you're seeing you are in a suffering, problematic space. And that's natural. That's the difference. Everyone is in there, and everyone is in the nature. See, I think because of us, if we're strictly from a Western, modern, psychological point of view, we don't have this teaching or this appreciation that everything's in the nature of suffering. As I said many times, when Buddha finally figured it all out and attained enlightenment, he didn't speak for 7 weeks. Because I can't explain this. It's beyond words. No one's going to get it. And they kept begging him, requesting him to teach. He said, okay. He taught after 7 weeks of silence. What did he teach first? 4 noble truths. What was the first truth? The truth of suffering. He didn't teach about, hey, look it, guys, enlightenment, you can have it. He taught that beings are in the nature of problems. Life is in the nature of problem. So that's how the self-compassion is going, and I'm one of them. No wonder I feel bad about 10 failed businesses. No wonder I feel bad about losing a job. Okay, that's because it's all in the nature of suffering, of course. So you have some sense of empathy, kindness, compassion for yourself, and that way and also for others. Because we're all in the same boat. And I think I'll leave it there, okay? So it's actively caring and comforting ourselves, okay? Now this can get indulgent in some ways, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. I think we'll, I think we can understand. Okay. It goes on and on and on and on. So self-compassion. If you treat other people's suffering with scorn, judgment, and tolerance, you will treat your own the same way. So it's about developing compassion for others. If you can't treat oneself this way, we can't treat others that way. If we can't treat others that way, we don't treat ourselves. So if we look like are judgmental on people, we're judgmental on ourselves. That guy in the street, he's just lazy. He's just lazy. Then you lose your job, how's it feel? I should have done better. I don't know. It's probably my laziness. You know what I mean? I'm going really fast now, but that's what happens, okay? Okay. Anyway, a lot more we could say about this, but that's it. Sorry. Hey, did I fail? No. Because he said, he reminded me to talk about solutions. I did talk about solutions, right? Okay. Any?
Had a good upbringing.
He didn't. He's not shaming me at all, is he? Should I feel as bad anyway?
No.
I wasn't successful. I didn't get it all out there. I don't know. Bad teacher. What's that? Timing. Any last points you'd like to make? Okay. When's our next meeting? Do you remember? Yeah. So I don't know either. I can't remember. Probably a month from now or something, right? I don't know what we're going to do. But if people really want something, it's really helpful for us if you give us your ideas what would be helpful to hear. I think what the point of this class is that there's not it's sort of I feel like kind of my brand or my mission. I haven't figured it out. My mission is I look at Buddhism, I see all this psychology, but it's kind of I feel like my job is to interpret it for modern situation. So if there's something that really resonates for you, or something you want to figure out more together, let me know, because that's very helpful. I like questions, I like guidance and all that stuff, because it's hard when you just sit up here. I might be hitting the spot with you guys, Okay? Well, nothing online, huh? I put him to sleep.
No.
Okay, thank you. Oh, just remember about intention when you go through your day. Now I want to just, try as best you can to be a learner. Just take away from I'm going to be a learner now. A learner means a spiritual person, by the way, because there's mistakes and flaws and problems each instant, all the time. They're not going to go away. And if you become a learner, then you get to develop your wisdom, and eventually you can go through anything, and it's not a problem. Lama Zopa Rinpoche, the story I often tell about him drowning, it wasn't a problem. Can you believe that? So if he can do it drowning, we can do it with little things like losing our job or getting criticized by our partners. That's small stuff. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. No, just remember one thing. Wait. Remember Stuart Smalley. Yeah, it doesn't. Look him up. He's on YouTube all over there.